Welcome to Play Differently. It's a panel presented by Richie Houghton and Nare about his new line of equipment and tour and concept, I guess. So for those of you who don't know, Richie is a techno pioneer. Been doing stuff since the late 80s, early 90s. From Windsor, Ontario. He used to go down to Detroit a lot for parties there. Met all the Detroit guys. Produced a lot of really instrumental, important techno as Plastic Man, other aliases, then became Richie Houghton. And as as Richie Houghton, he's also been an important force in music tech, and especially with DJing. He helped, or he did invent Final Scratch, which was correct?
Yeah. Well, is that working? Yeah. I wouldn't say we invented Final Scratch. When I say we, John Acquaviva and I, who's out there, we were lucky to meet a young inventor who was in his bedroom tinkering away and had this crazy idea of controlling an MP3 file with a piece of vinyl. And I remember actually, like, a friend of ours told us about it, and John was like, I'm going to go see this. And I was like, I don't believe it works. And John flew to Holland, and I think within 30 seconds was back on the phone after meeting this. He's like, Rich, you've got to see this shit. It's working. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And that was probably 1999, John? 99? Yeah. Yeah, it was, we kind of didn't see it coming, but as soon as we saw it, there was just no question that to not be involved in it and help take that idea and take that kid out of that room and bring it to the rest of the world. There was just too many positives that we saw in our head for creativity, for distribution, and we were just a bunch of geeks. It was, the first thing was like, oh my God, we can carry thousands of records and we can start doing edits and doing cool stuff. And then the idea and the story got bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just evolved.
And obviously you were involved in founding Beatport.
Yeah, Beatport was, I look back at that and, I was, one of the kids who bought the first iPod, and then iTunes came along, and the iPod was cool, but once the whole store came and it all became integrated, it all made a lot of sense. And what was great about Final Scratch was that you could carry thousands of records with you, but it was a real pain in the ass, like encoding every track in real time so that you could carry it with you. And so I think John and I both knew that there needed to be something that helped facilitate distribution of music for DJs if Final Scratch and those type of technologies and later Traktor were going to take off. So it was really, again, it was one step at a time. Everything just made sense. All those companies were founded or started or created by people that were like-minded, mostly from our kind of scene, and they were just like, hey, we want to do this, and we're like, yeah, can we help? Can we give some ideas? Or you need a bit of money? Let's kind of do this. And what's been amazing about the whole evolution of what John and I have been involved in and what I've been involved in as an artist in the whole electronic music scene, it's just really naturally grown huge and crazy, but as we've developed, like, it's been kind of symbiotic, and we've just had some great opportunities to help sometimes steer a little bit or just enjoy the ride and go with it.
So over the course of the last 15 years, you've been associated with digital DJing and advancing the cause for that and the technology. So what's the next step with Play Differently?
Well, I think what I find right now is for DJing is that there isn't actually, in my mind, as much creativity that should be out there. There's a lot of devices that kind of do the same thing, and perhaps we're in a point where convenience has overweighed creativity. And that's probably what started my mind the last couple of years of trying to get involved again in technology and find a way to kind of give some other opportunities to how people play in the DJ booth. It's it's funny, you know, in the 90s, I was doing a show called Dex Effects 909. And, you know, I'd bring my 909 drum machine and I'd have effects and do all this stuff. And part of me is really amazed about the technology that's out there now. On DJ mixers, you have all of that built in. And so I'm like, well, that's amazing. But then I see everybody kind of just doing the same thing with what's built in. And I think that is a bit of a disappointment for me. Because it wasn't, you know, I don't think there should be a formula for how you play or make music or anything. It's finding your own collection of tools to get your ideas out of your head. You know, the kind of tools that I want to use, the kind of buttons that I like, the kind of knobs that I feel connected to are probably different than you or any of you. So when, and think about the studio where we make music. There's tons of different types. There's Eurorack and modular and Dave Smith instruments, new and old, and everyone finds their own collection to create this wide variety of electronic music. But on a DJ front, it's kind of a couple of devices, especially that are in between turntables and everything, a couple of mixers that don't give too many different opportunities or options. And again, back to this, you know, effects and everything in it, it's just like perhaps it's become too easy and too easy for everybody to sound a little bit the same. And I don't think that's what electronic music should be. You know, when I heard or watched Derek May play when I was a kid, you know, him, you know, everyone know, well, I hope everybody knows, Derek May, Kevin Saunderson, Juan Atkins, Eddie Fowlkes, these guys, Blake Baxter. They're all buddies, they're all even sharing equipment back and forth sometimes, but when they played and when they made music and when they DJ'd, you know, even playing some of the same records, they were just like worlds apart, you know. Derek was like a little mad demon, and, you know, Kevin was like more smooth, Juan was in outer space, and but they all created something really unique. And that's what I want to hear more in DJing. For me, DJing isn't just playing a great record after another. You know, music is the base of it, but it's what you do to that music that defines you as an artist, as a DJ, how you manipulate sounds and create something that people on the dance floor or listening are like, wow, I never heard it like that before. I love digital DJing. I love the opportunities that and things that I can do with Traktor and Ableton and all this, but there's many different ways of DJing. I think the definition has kind of grown over the last 25 years. So what I'm interested in is creating a mixer and something that you plug in different peripherals, whether that's a turntable or whether that's a CDJ, a Traktor, or a synthesizer, or whatever. And that assortment, that choice of those different parameters creates some kind of magic. So I'm not interested in only the digital DJ. I want to see, you know, I just want to see people up there using music as a basis and then manipulating that as much as possible and beyond what's available today. And potentially, you know, not giving as many bells and whistles so that if people want to go beyond, they have to think about, well, if I was to use an effect, what effect would it be? And then going out and doing some research and find, well, I want to use a delay, but I'm going to use that delay, and not just go down a list and pick one of three, which everybody else is using, you know, or dialing it on, you know, telling one parameter, one knob to be this and one knob to be that. You know, what I'm getting at is, you know, I see the mixer as much of the instrument that we use as a DJ, even maybe more so than turntables and everything else. You know, it's without the mixer, without piping, you know, having somewhere where you bring together all those frequencies and manipulate it, there wouldn't be much going on beside just the music, which, as most people who see me play and know how I play, I want to go beyond what was pre-recorded on that piece of vinyl or on that digital file. I don't want to be a digital or analog jukebox. Yeah.
So yeah, the first product in the Play Differently is a mixer, right? And
yeah, I can say I'm going to be a bit cagey because we're not fully announcing things for another like 2 weeks. So if you want to learn more, someone can tackle me and try and grab it from my box. But
what can you talk about?
Yeah, what can I talk about? That's a good question. Yeah, well, going back to what we were just talking about with digital DJing and the types of DJing, the mixer accepts any type of input and wants to be agnostic, I think is the right way to say it, to what you put in there. So whether it's a turntable, whether it's, again, CDJ, whatever, it should all sound absolutely amazing. And it should all be equal. You know, what's out there right now is like, you know, I don't play on turntables. I did that a long time ago. But I find it disappointing when, you know, someone wants to play on turntables and then has to kind of battle with the other DJs because the turntable doesn't actually sound so good because they're cranking the levels, maybe the preamps aren't so good and things like that. Just kind of bizarre. Turntables, you know, and vinyl does have such a warm sound, but in the current state of things, it doesn't always come through. So I want to give and make sure that everybody has that same level of quality, and that's the core of what we're working on. You know, most of the instruments and mixers that we're using as DJs are relatively old, you know, from 10, 15 years ago. Okay, there's a couple of new things that come out, but they're usually Mark IIs and Mark IIIs, and they're kind of iterations. And there hasn't been really much that's really been redesigned from the ground up. And as our scene has become bigger, what's kind of happened, maybe I'll piss some people off or say the wrong thing, but some of the manufacturers have gone for quantity over quality. They're like, wow, now it's not just pro DJs, it's bedroom DJs and all this. Let's just make something that appeals to everybody. Which, you know, there should be products like that. But not everything can be for everybody, especially if you want to really think about the type of components you're using and the feel of things and the sound quality. I don't think there's many mixes out there that are really based on pure quality of sound. I'm sure you know, and people have heard DJs carting around old Uris and things like that because they sound better. You know, they do sound great. That's pretty ridiculous that some people have to cart around a 20-year-old mixer, you know, to sound better than, you know, a mixer that's been around for 5 years or even 2 years. But that's kind of the state of the affairs in the club world. And that's kind of a reverse flip of what it was like when John and I started. You know, there was, you know, we were playing on Newmark mixers and Reigns, and they all sounded really good. But then you plugged them into these club systems, which were like, not $10 club systems, but most of them were in mono. And there were some pretty atrocious systems. And now, and nobody talked about, you know, what kind of sound system do you have here? They're like, what? They probably didn't even know. But what's happened the last 20 years is the sound system has become, you know, important. This maybe sounds ridiculous, but it wasn't always that way. As long as you played a great track, even if it didn't sound so good, that vibe of that track came through, and we had amazing parties. But people didn't invest in systems like they do now. You know, people, you know, clubbers now know, hey, I'm going to go to, you know, to that club because they've got Function One or this and that. And you know, people put in their website. People know they've spent $250,000 on a sound system, and then they've got it plugged into, you know, a $200 mixer. I don't think that, you know, somewhere there's a weird bottleneck there. And this probably comes from the way I play. Maybe we all hear differently. Maybe not everybody hears the quality in the same way as I do. You know, but I play a lot of full resolution digital files. 3 or 4 or 5 things on top of each other. You know, I have huge monitors. I have massive bass going through. And I can feel when I'm pushing systems and I'm pushing the equipment that I'm using. You know, I feel like I'm just at the breaking point. And, you know, of course, this project started with something that I wanted. I wanted something that I could pipe all that stuff through and have more headroom and have, you know, it just coming out sounding as good, if not better, than what the record sounded like. Or if I turned on a feature, or if there was a filter on it, if there was, you know, EQs, that it would, you know, be precise and allow me to scope sound. It would allow me to affect things and only degrade them if I wanted to, not because the processing power of the A to Ds or D to As wasn't as good as it, you know, someone made a cost adjustment somewhere. You know, or what's also happened over the last 15, 20 years is a lot of components of some of our favorite mixers actually became obsolete. So some components were switched out to keep those devices on the market. Some started to sound not as good as we remembered. And there was a difference, a quality difference. So it's, you know, I thought it was about time. Actually, you know, for 5 or 6 years, well, actually 10 years, I've dreamed of creating some type of mixer. The main designer, well, the designer who I've worked together with is a gentleman called Andy Rigby Jones, who was the chief designer of the Zone 62 and the Zone 92 Alan Heath mixer, also the DB4 and a whole bunch of other mixers. And in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the 62 came out, we met at a kind of a convention like this, and we're just kind of 2 geeks dreaming of the future, and we started doing some modifications with Andy and my dad, and creating some custom versions of the mixers specifically for the shows I was doing. And then we, you know, when the Zone 92 came out, we did a Control 92, another version that was kind of feature overload. We learned a lot on that, which really helped us on this design. It was like, I wanted to do everything, and we crammed every little button on there, and then once I started using it, I just found that I just couldn't use everything that I thought I would. And it was a big design lesson. But in those early days of collaborating with Andy and my dad and Alan Heath, it was a dream to one day, you know, start from the ground up. And it took a lot longer than I imagined. But I also think for the last 10 years, I wasn't unhappy with what was out there. You know, I've been a big fan of I was on Vestax for a while in the early days, and then as soon as the 62 came out, then the 92 Alan Heath. It's been absolutely incredible. But, you know, I think things need to develop. This is, you know, I don't know if it's electronic music. There's so many definitions, but for me, it's techno. You know, when I, you know, talk about Derek and those guys, my definition was defined by the music that they played and the energy they threw out and the way they DJ'd, and it was always something new, you know, and you know, it was just futuristic, and that has always been my driving force for what I do. It's why, you know, when you hear me DJ, I don't play so much old music. you know. Because I've been around 25 years, I've kind of tried to play new music as it's come along. That's what excites me. You know, it excites me to play things that I've never heard before, maybe the crowd's never heard before, and if they have, put it together in a way that it's all fresh again. So on every level, music needs to develop, the instruments need to develop, I need to develop as an artist, I need to be challenged. Feeling a little bit like, okay, I've been playing on this device for 10, 15 years. You know, I'd like to change that. I'd like to change that. You know, I'm not calling any of these mixers obsolete. It's like, I don't use the turntable. I don't think it's obsolete. Maybe I said that once, but everyone has their own time to get into it. And that's the core of electronic music, pushing forward, trying to innovate and challenge yourself, and also being true to yourself and using what feels right to you. If that synthesizer feels right to you, use it. If you're good at playing keyboards and into the arrangement window, do it. Like, I can't do that. I was never good at that. I like using weird knob sequencers, and I kind of twiddle them until something sounds good. And, you know, follow, you know, who you are. And with the equipment that you're using. So this thing won't be for everybody, but I hope it's another alternative to what's out there.
So you said
I talk a lot when you get me
okay. That's what we're here for. You said the control mixer was kind of feature overload. So is the new mixer more streamlined? You can tell me that.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. I think. You know, I guess a lot of people see me as, you know, the digital DJ and fully digital. I'd probably expect to come to my studio and see only and Pro Tools and an Avid console, which I would love to have an Avid console if they look amazing. But it's a mishmash, and in probably in the last 5 or 6 years, I've kind of gone a little bit back, not necessarily to analog, but just to devices and machines that someone has thought about and made some choices and decisions, and not said, let's give you guys, you know, everything. Kind of what we did on the night too. I was like, I want everything, and Andy was like, okay, let's try and, you know, we wanted to put it into production, but we couldn't because it was like you couldn't hardly even open it after you closed it. Was like, that's it. But back to the point, I love that an instrument has constraints and some limits, and that choices have been made for how you interface with it. You know, it's like when if you use a plug-in 303 or an original 303, they both sound, well, actually, they sound pretty similar. I actually love the digital versions right now, but they sound different when you play them, because the 303 has these tiny little knobs, and so there's only so much you have to turn to actually make it kind of squelch and change filter sweeps. And then if you use a digital version, you're going to assign that to some kind of controller. So maybe you're using, I don't know, push or something, but the knob's going to change the way it works, good or bad. I don't know, but there is something very tied to that connection of how we manipulate sound. And if everything is computerized and electricity, and the only way we get ourselves through all this and come out the other end is by how we touch and move things, then that's got to be a really important design decision. So a lot of what has gone into the mixer is what parameters do we need to change and manipulate sound, and what are the best components to make that interesting or feel good, or you know, how can you kind of magnify the movement of the musician or the DJ. So it definitely isn't feature overload. There's no menus or you know, do this or do that. Everything is like, that does that, that does that, that does that. It should be like my 303 or any of my other instruments. Like Moog uses different knobs, Dave Smith uses different knobs. You know, I can be in my studio and close my eyes and I kind of grab things. Okay, maybe I won't know. Sometimes I'll know if that's a filter, but I'll at least be like, okay, this is Dave Smith, there's Moog, there's Yamaha. That's why I call it in my studio, all my instruments, they're like my friends, you know. Like, I think that's my girlfriend, you know. I think, so that's this mentality. These thoughts have gone really back into this. And in that way, it's a step back from what's on the marketplace. But again, going back to all the bells and whistles of what's out there, a great instrument is a great instrument because there's a set of rules and it does one or a couple of things really well. And that's what we're trying to get back to so that people can get on this device and lose themselves in the moment, close their eyes and mix and manipulate and have something come out of them that may be, you know, on another level or at least different than what comes out of them with the current products that are out there.
So it sounds like you're putting a big emphasis on the physical for this, like in the feedback you get from them, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, we're all, you know, touchscreens are good for certain things. When I did the Plastic Men Live show, I had, in the beginning, the whole show was run by different touchscreens. And then after like 3 or 4 shows, I was like, man, this doesn't work. It really worked for a couple of like fader movements, but then I put some hard controls back in because I needed to it was working fast. I needed to grab and know that did that did that. And so we've kind of gone back to that mentality. You know, different size knobs and buttons and different feels, different weights, different curves if it compared between different filters. To have a nice tactile performance. It's also you're playing for 2, 3, 5 hours, whatever. You want something solid. You want to something you can grab and feel connected to. Clubs are mostly hot, sweaty, and dark, so you need to be able to, that's why touchscreens don't work so well in clubs at the present time. So it's a lot of these kind of ideas that have been filtered down into this design.
For a long time, we've been associated with innovation and pushing things forward in DJing and music, but now you're kind of going backwards, or backwards is a strong word, but you're going back to basics, back to analog. So how do you keep innovating while moving back to a simpler model?
Well, I think it's, to innovate or to expand and develop, you're always reevaluating where you came from, and what you've done, what you did well, what you didn't. And I think that idea of using ideas from the analog world and tying that to the digital world or tactile controls, that's where you're going to find interesting combinations. Also, in the DJ world and this kind of the high-end studio world, when, I don't know if I'm going to get the dates right, but it seemed like in the 90s, as guys like us were buying all these weird little synthesizers and cheap secondhand mixers, it was because the big studios had kind of got rid of everything and gone completely digital. The new sound quality was amazing, but after a while, it seemed like they felt that they had gained something and lost something, maybe the tactility. And I think the DJ world has kind of ended up going the same way and now is finding a shift back to quality and a balance between analog, digital, but yeah, the quality keeps coming back up in my mind. It's also, a number of things that's happened over, that we spoke about in the beginning of the chat. Final Scratch, Beatport, iTunes, MP3s, to allow the world of electronic music, or even, let's just talk about electronic music, to develop and become as big as it is, would have never have happened, in my opinion, without the innovations of digital DJing and Beatport and other providers, because it was kind of hitting a wall. If you were in Alaska or some small place that didn't have a record store, you know, or you weren't cool and weren't one of those guys or girls who walked into the store and had the record underneath saved for you, you may have never got that music. And that was a super cool time and really interesting, but it needed to go further. And, but to go further, we actually had to kind of take a step backwards with sound quality. Some of those early MP3 files, like I was happy to take my early Traktor system and have tons of music with me. Wasn't as good as, you know, at that point as the vinyl, but I chose that would give me a greater flexibility of creativity. And now we're at a point where I think it's time to bring, you know, kind of look back what worked, what didn't, and make some of those readjustments. You know, clubs are out there, incredible systems, you know, great music coming out, high resolution files are available. You know, CDJs are getting upgrades with new, better A to D, D to A's. There's a new 1200 coming out that has been, you know, turntable that's been redesigned, is a heavier weight for less rumble, which means better, you know, signals and less noise. So we're all moving in that way, but that wouldn't happen without technical innovation. You know, it's like the Technics 1200. Some people are like, how can you touch that? You know, just bring the original out. And they're like, well, there's only, I was just reading, there's only one mold left. And, you know, we've gone back and we've looked what was good. And we've also looked, well, some of the parts aren't available. And some of the parts could be made better now. So let's move forward and see what we can, what's the next generation 1200 sound like. It's not a surefire, but it probably is going to make some of the records sound potentially even better. Yeah. So if that's going to be piped through a great sound system, then somewhere in between there needs to be a great sounding mixer, or we're completely fucked. So.
Do you think there's a market for this mixer? Like, do you think it would be popular, or that it would be in demand?
I have a little bit of anxiety on that. I don't sleep very well at night sometimes right now. I don't know how well it's going to sell. I know that the people who've seen it and played with it have all been blown away by the quality. Some people have scratched their heads a little bit with some of the features, while others have been like, fuck, that's cool. But, you know, there's plenty of devices out there that are kind of mass market, and that's not really the way we're going. If a couple of artists use this and do something really unique, that would be, that's enough, you know? I'm happy to have it. But it's also, it's not, you know, it's not a purely Richie Hawtin mixer. It's definitely not specific for a digital DJ. You know, I was adamant that if I ever created a mixer, you know, all the ones that I've been using for the last couple of years had 2 aux sends, and I was like, I have to have 3 sends. There's no way we're going to spend this much time and money developing this thing if I don't have 1 more send. And so the prototype, you know, the early beta had 3 sends. But it was so close together that I couldn't get my finger in there, so I had to take the cap off of 1 just so I could use 2, and it was just like, oh, fuck. Okay, so we only have 2 sends. There you go, I told you something about it. But this, along the way of like, you know, finding this balance with Andy of, you know, no, Rich, we can't put that in. I was like, well, I can see space on the top. He's like, yeah, but you have to look underneath because there's circuitry, there's no room. And then talking to other DJs, a lot of my colleagues have been really incredibly engaged with this and like, well, why did you do that? And, well, could you do this? And some things have been moved around and changed, and we've added things. You know, originally we wanted this to be released a year ago, and as much as I wish, you know, I would have been a bit happier and I had more sleep over the last year if it had been, it wouldn't have been as good as it is now. Because there's been a lot of iterations and a lot of testing, and and some sets, you know, we were using it at Entra last year with Dubfire and Maceoplex and playing on it and yeah, really putting it through its paces. So it is something that I feel everyone I see play on it plays differently. You know, not everybody wants that because that's a bit of a challenge. You know, I had some friends over the other day I was showing, and a couple of them were older, my age, who'd been DJing for a long time, and they were like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get into this. Because it's, you know, we've reconfigured some things. You know, why release another mixer that just sounds better? It should be different in my mind. And Charlie was over, Matrix Man, and I was like, so we're playing next week in Austin. You want some sound check time to get used to it? Because it's kind of different. He was like, no, I'm ready. Fuck it, let's go for it. So some people get it. Some people are open-minded and not, you know, kind of stuck in their ways. It all comes back down to that thing of why you in techno and electronic music. You know, our instruments as a DJ and as a musician constantly changes. That's the beauty of it. That's the energy. That's what inspired me in the early days. So it's like, yeah, let's make something new and interesting and see what happens. I was playing last night in LA in sound, and I've been playing on it on and off, well, in different versions for the last year. And as I was playing last night, you know, I was like, okay, something's got to change here. Like, because I've kind of have my old setup or a version of my setup that I've had for a long time, but now plugged into a new device. And it's like, okay, this worked, but on the old setup, but I can do something different here. I've got to like I've changed my sound card. Maybe I'm going to change, maybe bringing another device for some drums or something. So I'm reimagining what I could do. And that's why I'm into this stuff. I think that's healthy too.
Well, from the way you're talking about it, it sounds like this mixer would kind of make a DJ think about the way they use it more so than any other mixer they're using.
Well, thinking can be good, and actually, thinking is good about what you're trying to do and what you're, you know, creatively and what you're doing as an artist, what you stand for. But the most magic moments, well, sometimes they're completely accident, but come from when you know something inside out. Like when I'm in the studio, I don't think. It's just like, I want that sound, I'm doing this, and I'm jamming live, and it comes out, and you're like, wow, that just happened. And so that really happens when you're DJing. So to take the chance of going away from a setup that you've used for a long time and jump into something new, it's going to take some time. But you hope that once you know it, and if that instrument and device or mixer has been set up in a way that has been well thought out, like a, you know, like a Dave Smith or a Moog or any of these, like, and perhaps that device can unlock something that had never come out before. You don't know. You've got to kind of make it and go with it. And yeah, I find that, you know, exciting. You know, when I was a kid, 13, 14, I was running a bulletin board system before the internet and talking to people on my modem, and then I started programming it and hacking it and making a colored version and this and that. And I loved being on both sides of it, being the user, the kind of manipulating it, and that's kind of the same now. It's kind of intertwining creativity and music and technology and all the things that I love.
Has using the mixer yourself changed the sound or approach of your sets in the last 6 months, or how long you've been using it for?
It's, yeah, it's, you know, things are smoother and well, I don't know, it's rounder and warmer. I don't know, not necessarily for the sound of the mixer, but just yeah, yeah. I'm definitely like there's a lot of things that I think that are that are changing at the moment. It's also interesting to see how people approach a new device in the DJ booth, and then you see how they're using it. You know, Loco Dice has been testing it for the last couple of weeks and sending me photos of like some EQ pictures, and like, oh, look, if I do this, it's really cool. And I was like, okay, yeah, I didn't try that. And so you try it and like, okay, maybe it works for him, but not for me. But it's also the electronic community is nice when everybody's working together on that, and not worrying about what's going on stage or you know, who's doing what or any of the other complexities of the scene. Just basic level enjoyment and collaborating on a device that we can all share. And I think there's one thing that all DJs and musicians share, whether you're whatever genre you're coming from or age, is quality of sound. Everybody wants to sound amazing. You know, you want to play a record. You have that record in your head. And you want to be like, okay, there it is. I love this record. Now I'm going to turn this record inside out. You need devices to do that. It's also perhaps just a product of how large the scene is, because there hasn't been that many new releases of DJ-specific technology. And now there's thousands or hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, I don't know, DJs playing on similar things. That maybe that's why there needs to be something more, just to give a different a viewpoint.
And right now you're in the middle of a tour to showcase the mixer, which seems kind of...
We're not showcasing it because we're trying to, like, is anyone taking any photos? We're trying to get as many friends to play on it. Like, it's called Prototypes Tour, and what that means is we have, there's about 12 prototypes in the world right now. We've got 8 of them traveling around the world with DJs and friends, and it's pretty much locked down. But there's the feel. We can tweak the feel, and that's what we're, trying to find the. You can think about all that and make diagrams, and scientifically, though, it should be like this with this frequency. It makes sense, But once you're in the field and everyone's playing with it, you get much more feedback, and you can tell when it works. It's like someone does something, and everybody in the room feels it. Like in sound last night in the club, you could, like it felt different. It was just like massive.
So you're using the tour as like a beta test almost? The tour is like a beta test almost?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had an alpha version that we were testing the last year, and this is kind of like the 3rd or 4th iteration. And Andy right now is changing some pots out for another iteration that hopefully I'll have when I get back to Berlin next week. But it's all about the feel of how do I say it, like how a frequency or a sound changes and feels as you move something. It's back to that point, like it's an instrument. Some people like weighted keys on a keyboard, like, and some people like more faders to control levels. Some people, some DJs still prefer rotaries. That's a different way. A rotary brings up the volume, and it just has a completely different feel. Somehow it's smoother. I'm not very good on it. I was always a fader guy. But all these things, slight changes, can magnify that movement. If you're doing that, bringing something in, if you're changing an EQ or a filter or turning things on and off, how do those buttons feel? That's really important stuff. We also want the mixer to be playable, not just, okay, I'm going to play this record and this record. If you're doing that, it sounds great, but it should, sit on many, many different levels.
It sounds like you're very proud of the mixer, and obviously you want artists to use it, but do you think this is something that audiences would notice like a difference in when they're hearing it on a system?
There was a couple people last night who were like, man, this sounds, I don't know what they said, like massive or big or amazing. Like there was more pressure in that room last night. So I wasn't sure. Like I thought it was, I definitely know the people behind the device, behind the mixer can feel and know it has a different sound. But I do feel, I was talking to Kobe, who's the owner of Sound Nightclub, about this last night, and he was like, okay, I don't know if people can hear the difference, but they can feel the difference. If you spend money on a great sound in the right way, and you pipe good music through it, through the right components, you know, someone could just come and be like, oh, that was a great night. You know, my favorite, my favorite song just sounded unlike I've ever heard it before. That's not only the DJ and timing that song at the right moment or overlaying that song, it's also the components that bring that song to our ears. So yeah, I think I do feel that both sides of the equation will appreciate something.
It seems like this particular invention or a product is more about feeling, whereas I think your past work was more about like processing and chopping things up and looping and very technical, whereas this feels more like abstract in a way.
Yeah, maybe, but I think there's, my whole career has gone by feeling and intuition and kind of going through by my gut. Of course, okay, DE9 and some of the albums were quite, I can't believe I stared at Pro Tools for so long, but that also, when I was working on those albums, it was, you would just sit back and do stuff and then kind of listen to it and try to make things that felt organic and had a beautiful flow to them. When I record, other than those kind of technical D9 albums, all my recordings, 99% of them, don't touch the arrangement window. It's just, I get the machines working and I just jam out. It's like I'm, DJing maybe with other people's music and in the studio is kind of me and the synthesizers, but it's the same thing. I'm manipulating and moving and grabbing things and turning knobs and trying to capture my interactions with those machines. So even the technical ones, I tried to make sure that they sounded like that, maybe I wasn't good enough to articulate it earlier in my career, but I want to hear me coming through the machines, even as simple as, Future making acid tracks back in the day, and me making some of my, well-known records with similar instruments, a 707, a 909, and a 303. But, we all use the same machine. Okay, each of them sounds a little bit different, but even just how we would move those knobs in our own way, those are the things that really interest me. Those are the things that I like to talk about. Those are the things I want to hear from people making electronic music. I know there's some people who are very good at cutting things up and in their own way and allowing them to come through the computer in that way too. But I don't want to, it's human and machine. It has to be a very interesting, perfect balance of that, so that there is a feeling in the music or in the set, in the performance, or then it's just bells and whistles and bleeps and blops.
How long have you been working on the mixer for?
About, I think in my mind, like 4 or 5 years, because a number of times there was like sketches and ideas going back and forth to Andy and Alan Heath, but really on what is here, 2 years. It's been pretty intense, because in between making music and touring and enter shows on Ibiza and everything else, there's had to been like a lot of focus and clarity on making something that would be interesting for our community. Like it did start off like with the Third Descend and this and that, like I want that, and then it was just like, okay, well, is anybody else gonna use this? Let's find a a good balance of I want to see other people playing with this machine. It'd be amazing.
Do you envision releasing other products after the mixer?
I think we learned a hell of a lot with this. I'm interested to see how other people and DJs and manufacturers respond. And I think it will be something we continue with. Yeah, it's, I like transparency of how I'm playing. I like sharing ideas and talking and to other artists about how they play and how they, you know, geek out with electronics. So now that we've kind of got to this point, it would be great to continue that discussion and see where things go. You know, I don't, this can't be the end all. This won't answer all the questions. It won't be for everybody. And nothing should be for everybody. That's the point. You know, there's 2 or 3 mixers on the market right now that pretty much everyone uses. They all have their they have their sound, some have their effects and this and that, and there needs to be more of that. So hopefully this is part of that, and hopefully other people will come on board and create new things, and if not, hopefully we'll be part of that stream of new devices.
Well, we only have like 4 minutes left, so I think we can probably end on that note. That was good.
Yeah, it was good?
Yeah.
Was that okay? It was okay, guys?
It's a good ending.